Welcome to How to Save on Money on Food. We are so excited to have you here today with us, especially our HCE members around the state, as well as people from Illinois and all over the place. So we're looking forward to a great webinar today, and we're excited to get started. So you have two of the three of us on today. This is our team with the Consumer Economics Educators. Kamaya Wallace-Bouchard is our colleague, but today I'm Sasha Grobinstetter, and I'm going to be on, and then I'll let Kathy introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Kathy Sweedler, Consumer Economics Educator, and I work kind of in the central of the state, Champaign, Ford, Iroquois, and Vermilion counties, as well as get the pleasure of working with people statewide, maybe even in other states through our webinar system.
Great, thank you, Kathy. And I work in Will, Grundy, and Kankakee counties. That's normally where I'm housed, but I also do things across the state as well. So we're hoping that you found the chat already, but if you haven't, we'd like to know what city you're logging in from today. And if you're not from Illinois, that's okay too. You can let us know what city and state that you're from, and I would love to know where you're from. So we've got some Savoy, Peru, Tampa, Florida.
Don't forget that
Minnesota.
Don't forget you can use the chat to reply to Sasha and ask questions.
Manhattan, Crest Hill, Illinois, Kankakee, Illinois, Chicago. A few Florida people, that's great. Okay, you can keep typing in the chat. But we're going to keep zooming along as we go through our webinar today. And these are our objectives for today. We're going to be talking about how to explore how people spend money on food, because we do think that's it's good to know about what other people do as well as what you might be doing. We're going to talk about some strategies to lower food costs, because that's important. That's why we're all here, right? And then, of course, we're going to know how to make a realistic food plan that balances money, time, and nutritional needs, because we all have different nutritional needs or different favorites. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to switch it over to Kathy, and she's going to talk about some food expenditures.
All right, well, this is great. We wanted to kind of take a look, as Sasha mentioned, of what do other people do and what are some of the food trends that we see in the U.S. And excuse me, we're going to be using research from the USDA and others to kind of set the framework for this. And Sasha, if you could move the slide, please. Well, I first wanted to talk about how much do people spend on food, and of course this varies from household to household. But if we look at this Bureau of Labor Statistics from 2017, you can see kind of the share of people's income, where it goes and where their expenses go. And so one of the reasons that we think a webinar like this on how to save on food is important is that people typically spend around 13% of their expenses on food, and that's actually quite a big percentage compared to many other things. Of course, housing and transportation are higher, but still we have room sometimes in our food expenses to save money when we're looking for places to reduce our spending. And this may be one of those times as we move into more economic uncertainty where people will be looking for places to make modifications in their spending. But we're also kind of interested in what is happening kind of over time with spending in foods. Next. And so that's where we again have some great research to share with you. And one of the big things that kind of pops out is whether people are spending money on food at home versus away. And this is a timeline that shows from the 1960s all the way up to 2017, looking at expenditures on food at home, which is the bottom blue area, and then away from home. And in 2017, or right around that time period, is when we saw that more money was being spent away from home on food than on food being prepared at home. Now, in our current shelter-at-home situation in many communities, this data may not be playing out right now, or it might be. I'm not really don't have current data, so I'm looking forward to seeing that as researchers get a chance to catch up on it. But when we start thinking about saving on food, we have to think about not just the food prepared at home, but also the food we're eating away. Another way that researchers like to look at this kind of information is by generations. And I'm sure many of you have seen the generations defined or heard about it through different sources, but just real quickly, we have defined people as millennials born between 1981s to the mid 2000s, and that's currently one of our largest, most diverse generation. And then we have Gen Xers, baby boomers, many who are moving into retirement if they're not already there, and then traditionalists born before 1946. And so the USDA recently did a study to see how people from different generations spend their food dollars. And one of the things that kind of interesting tidbit they found was that the number of monthly food trips increases with age, but it decreases with income. Then they also took a look at how people by generation spend money on vegetables. And I thought this was really fascinating. First off, one thing you can see is that as income goes up, people tend to spend more on vegetables. But take a look at that red line. Those are the millennials. And what we see is that they like their vegetables. All those years when we were raising them and we were saying, eat your vegetables, they actually listened. And you can see that millennials overall are demanding healthier and fresher foods. Vegetables is just one example of that. And this is something that people in marketing are very interested in because they want to provide the grocery stores, the ag people, the marketers, they want to provide what people are demanding, and there's definitely a demand for healthier foods. Okay, so moving on, we can also kind of look at how much time are people willing to put into preparing food, because that's a big factor when we're making purchase decisions, is how much time do we have to put into that. And what we see is that even though millennials like healthy food, they don't want to spend as much time on it because they're actually pretty busy too. And so they're willing to spend more to buy foods that are more prepared, more ready to eat. So they may be some of the people who are, we see, at the deli line picking up more things that are already put into foods that are either salads or ready to go and things that we can come home and eat. All right, so while we're kind of looking at this research data, let's bring it back home and think about what's important to you about the food you eat. And let's open up that chat box again and go ahead and put in your comments there about what do you think about when you choose where to spend your food dollars. I know that I'm big on food that tastes good, so tasty is a big thing for me, but maybe there's other things that are important to other people. So I see Best Buy for the best nutrition. All right, ease of preparation, healthy, flavor, good value and healthy. With kind of a theme going here. Organic, no, sometimes that costs more, sometimes not. Convenience, that's not an unfortunately, that's a reasonable value to put on things. Healthy, convenience. So we're seeing here, even just in the chat, that there's sometimes a push-pull between, we want it convenient, but we want it healthy, locally sourced. A lot of real important values coming out in the chat to support this idea that it's more to it than just a kind of simple situation. So I'm going to go ahead, keep going with the chat because this is great, and we'll summarize this in the email when we send it out to you so you can see it. If you are on a device right now that makes it hard to read the chat, we've got you covered. And I'm going to turn it back over to Seisha to talk a little bit more about ways to now save money on food.
Thank you, Kathy. I just want to quickly mention that I'm a millennial, and fresh vegetables are something that's very important to me, especially for my young son. I'm teaching him to eat vegetables, so hopefully by the time his generation has a name, we can have tons of fresh vegetables for him. So I'm very excited about that. So next up, we're going to be talking about some strategies on how to cut down on food costs. And I'm looking forward to sharing those with you. So, of course, we want to balance our time, our cost, and nutrition. It doesn't need to be one or the other, but we do need to consider kind of the pros and cons and find a good balance. I know that right now is kind of, again, a strange time because most of us are eating at home. Sometimes that meal looks like a bowl of cereal for our family, and sometimes it looks like a gourmet lunch with a beautiful chicken breast and a large salad. But, I think sometimes cooking at home, we have more control of those ingredients. It's typically often cheaper. And then, of course, eating out, it definitely takes less time to eat out. You don't have to prepare the meal, and then you don't have to clean up, which is a great thing. There's obviously less skill required, and it is convenient. But according to an article in the USA Today by the Motley Fool, the typical food establishment charges a 300% markup on the items it serves. So if you're thinking about a meal that costs $30, actually it maybe only costs $10 to prepare and serve. So it's just something to think about when we're talking about, saving costs in food at home. Say you typically spend $10 a day on lunch for yourself. From maybe your local deli or local place in town, plus another $100 on restaurants for the week. That's a total of $600 in food costs, which can really be taken down if you start looking at eating at home. So next up, we're going to be talking about strategies to cook at home more. One thing to do that I love to do is just simplify, especially in my life when I have a young preschooler running around. The less ingredients, the better, it seems like in my house. So 5 ingredients or less, maybe 3 or 4. You can cook it in one pan or one pot. Those are my favorite meals. And then if we use, reusable plates, then, they get cleaned and that's it. It's amazing. Of course, making larger meals. So this might be difficult maybe if you are a person who is just cooking for 1 or 2 at home. But just thinking about making larger meals, and you can maybe have several meals or freeze portions. I know a big thing right now is food prepping. So, there's lots of things out there to prepare meals on Sunday or Saturday and then, have food for the whole week. That can be a really good cost saver. And then, of course, just stocking up for things that you usually use on hand. For us at our house, these are things like milk and eggs. We use a lot of beans, which I was really surprised about, especially during this interesting time. I was completely surprised at how many kidney beans we were using on a regular basis, especially with feeding the little guy. I was like, wow, he loves kidney beans. This is great. So just making sure that you have those items, in your pantry or in an area where you keep supplies is a good thing as well. So some things that are proven to work when we talk about keeping costs down is using a shopping list. If you research actually shows that you'll spend more in the grocery store if you don't have a shopping list over if you do. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. But using that to me, having a shopping list keeps me on task, keeps me on target, and I'm not looking at all the other delicious goodies that are in the bakery or maybe in the ice cream aisle, and helps me keep those costs down. Of course, limiting the time in the store is another one. If you're looking for an easy way to save $1,000 or more a year, again, we're talking about that shopping list. The average shopper spends 40% more on impulse purchases. 40% more, that's insane, when shopping without a list. And if you spend $50 a week at the grocery store, there's a good chance that $20 of that $50 was unplanned. And that really does add up. And there's also some research that shows that the average shopper spends $2.17 every minute they're in the supermarket, and you're likely to spend 50 cents more, so $2.67 every minute you're in the store after 30 minutes. So get in, get out, get in the car. And then, of course, lastly, we don't want you to shop hungry, people. Shopping hungry is bad. Sometimes we buy more when we're hungry. I know that I've certainly done this in the past. So just be thinking about, don't go in when you're really hungry, because then everything will look really good, especially those cookies on aisle 4. So just some things to think about when we're thinking about how to save money on food costs. of course, we kind of talked about staples a little bit, but here are kind of a list of staples. These might be some that you really like. Others might be some that you don't. But of course, things like apples and bananas, or apples and bananas, beans, brown rice, canned tomatoes, one of my favorites, canned tuna, eggs, fat-free milk, kale. Kale's another one. Fun fact, if you didn't know, the largest supplier who bought kale previously to was a pizza chain, and they put it in their pizza displays. So it's just an interesting thing that kale then became this beautiful popular thing. Of course, then potatoes and rolled oats. So of course, we also look for foods that store well, and that's something that's important to us. So we have another question for the chat that's coming up. So what foods do you like to keep on hand? I would love to see what kind of things you keep on hand. Maybe there are things that I haven't thought about, or maybe that we could all benefit from. Rice, it's another great one. Yes, herbs. Hopefully dried herbs, but good fresh herbs are good too, especially after coming out of the garden. Canned fruit, variety of dried beans, canned tomatoes, potatoes. Those are all great. Keep that going in the chat. Cheese, but we'll come back to that as well. So another thing that we like to look at is called unit pricing and comparing our costs. So in this example, there is this is the information that kind of breaks down the cost of the price of the product by per unit. It's usually given in ounces, as you can see here. So we have the unit price tag. So there's obviously the barcode at the top, and then I'll slowly move down. The next thing is the item description, and you can see that this is looks like some ice cream, light caramel delight. Sounds amazing. Right before lunch, definitely could eat maybe a pint of this myself. Then of course we have the unit price of 9.80 cents per ounce. So it's something to be considered of when we're talking about different sizes of products, whether it's ice cream or rice or even cereal. And then you can see here the total price for this purchase is $5.49. So it gives you a better understanding of how much this purchase is costing you. And one thing to look at is that maybe not always the bigger boxes are always cheaper by the ounce. So it's something to be considered of when we're looking at unit pricing. Another way to look at unit pricing is by serving. So for this example, we have two different kinds of rice. We have a long grain rice and a fast track minute rice. You saw earlier in the example that us millennials really enjoy things that were easy to prepare. Trust me, I love those rices that you can put in the microwave and then they're done in like a minute and a half. Makes my life so much easier. But you know, when we're talking about convenience, we're usually paying for that convenience. So this example again, the long grain rice is a 16-ounce bag versus the 14-ounce size box. The long grain rice has more servings of 20 versus 9. The servings is 3/4 cup each, so they're equal. And then the cost is just a little different. So the long grain rice is 5 cents per serving, whereas the fast track minute rice is 22 cents per serving. So you might be saying to yourself that this difference isn't very large, but when we're talking about total of all your groceries or looking at things by serving size, it can add up very quickly. So just something to be thinking about when we're talking about, yes, this is a 17-cent difference, but it could be much more when we're talking about other products. So another one, talking about unit pricing, is actually by different sizes. So when we're talking about this, we're looking at the difference between buying one apple versus a bag of apples. So here we're buying one apple, and that's one serving. Of course, it's usually 5 pounds. But then, you know, it might actually be cheaper to buy the 7 servings of apple in the bag versus maybe getting seven apples, you know, and putting them in the bag yourself. So it's just something about looking at the different pricing of foods and seeing what works best for you and your life. Of course, you know, we want you to make that choice on your nutritional choices, your preferences, and any kind of variety in your diet. But again, just looking at the different pricing when we're talking about units. And then I'm actually going to switch this over to Kathy, and she's going to talk a little bit more about eating out on the social part of our lives.
Right, wonderful. I'm going to kick off from here, and I understand there's some kind of feedback noises happening with the mics. We'll try to adjust our mics and see if we can get that cleaned up a little bit. I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. All right, so I mentioned earlier when I was going over the research and things that while we talk about food costs, we often think that we kind of focus in, I think, on our grocery bills, and those are a big piece, and we want to take a look at that. But it may be worth looking out at eating out dollars as well. And even though I know we've been limited in how much we can go out, there's still takeout and things like that. And so and I just want to mention too that we don't want to just go into this with the mode of like, I won't eat out anymore, because we get a lot out of eating out. It's social. We have a chance to change our environment. It's convenient, as we've thought about. So what can we do that isn't cut it out, but might lower costs? And I have a few ideas here I'll go over, but maybe you can throw some of your strategies into the chat as I go as well, because more ideas is always better. So some of the things that I've done to lower costs when I'm eating out is share entrees. Sometimes I know it's a place that has very big entrees, and it's easy for my husband and I to split that and share it, and then we might even have room for dessert. We've also, ordering water with meals can save on costs. Sometimes the beverages can be quite expensive as a percent of the income, of the percent of the cost of the meal. Coupons. There's often great coupons to eat 2 for 1 or other things that are available, get that free appetizer. So those are worth watching for. Another idea is when you're meeting up with friends or things like that is to consider going out for lunch rather than dinner out. Maybe that'll be a less expensive option than the dinner out menu. And I also kind of try to keep in mind what I want to spend before I get there. Seisha mentioned about not grocery shopping when you're hungry. Well, when I start looking at a menu at a restaurant, everything looks wonderful. And so I have to kind of make sure that my eyes aren't bigger than my stomach or my wallet. And so I like to have an idea of how much I want to eat and also how much I want to spend. And I think that's a good way to look at it. And so if you know, for example, in your mind you only want to spend $12, then that helps you keep your meal under your limit. And I'm not saying $12 is the right number, but just having that in your mind when you go can help you set that limit on yourself and help guide you. Somebody asked in the chat what are good sources for coupons, and that might be a good one again to ask our audience. But I keep an eye out for local coupons that of the restaurants that I like around town, and so that's kind of my strategy. Sometimes you can see them advertised on social media, or I read the newspaper in our newspaper, things like that. So we'll see what other ideas people have for coupons in the chat. Another strategy that I'd like to talk about is stepping down food costs. And this kind of comes back to the idea of not cutting out things, but just revisiting how much you want to do. Next slide, please, Seisha. And I'm just going to give sort of a cliche example, but I really like coffee, and I really like good coffee. And so I don't know, that if I was looking at ways to cut food costs, that I would feel satisfied if I couldn't have good quality coffee. But I would maybe if I was trying to do something else with my money, I would seriously consider cutting back on the amount of good coffee I had. So maybe instead of buying coffee out 3 times a week, maybe 2 times a week would work for me. Or maybe I'd like to learn how to make it at home. And, this is sort of a cliche example, and I saw Sasha said Kathy does love her coffee. This was something I really had to figure out when we went into shelter at home because it mattered to me. And so that's why we're not telling you, like, do this exactly. You have to figure out what's worth it to you and what's the substitution that makes sense. And good ideas coming in the chat about coupons from local things, coupon books from school fundraisers, um, coupon, yeah, I'm seeing that one a couple times. The restaurants often have email lists, or they may be, you can follow them on social media and they'll send you coupons and things. So that's a great ideas happening. So okay, so next slide, please. So kind of going along with this and thinking back on all the different things that we've been talking about, if you were going to share your best cost-saving food tip with a friend or a family member or us, what would it be? What is your favorite cost-saving food tip that you'd like to share? And I'm going to be quiet for a minute and let that chat just kind of rock it for a minute with tips. So making use of leftovers. I know one of mine is make soups. I don't know, but soups is a good way for me to use leftovers. It lasts a lot, many days if I make a big pot. Um, Choosing the grocery store that has low cost for you. Somebody mentioned all these. Using a list to shop, buying food on sale. Yes. Looking at the grocery ads before you go can be a great strategy. Drinking water. I can remember one summer I felt like half my cart was full of drinks, and after that we went to a lot more water. Looking at good recipes that stretch items like meat, which might be more expensive. Okay. All right. Discount grocery stores overall. Soups and slow cookers. Yep. Love those soups, slow cookers. One dish meals. Making a plan. I keep seeing that. Making a plan. And getting the whole family involved so that they can help with the cooking and they're more invested in eating it after you cook it. Okay. All right, well, this is a good transition to putting it all together where we want to kind of talk a little bit more about planning. And I'm going to keep talking, but I'm loving that we're still getting things in the chat. Maybe I should read a few of these. Instant pot recipes, the newest, like better than a crock pot, I understand. Coordinating with neighbors to have a supper club, prep for a larger group, but exchange meals. That's nice. And Brooke has just shared in our chat another resource on shopping to save. It's kind of a buying guide about good deals. And we'll again be sending out these links in our emails as well. So, all right. Good comments. All right, let's go to the next slide and start talking about creating a meal plan. A lot of people actually mentioned this in the chat, so that was very timely. Thank you, people. And this is something that I have done for many years, and I just feel like one of the things that I like about a meal plan is if I know what I'm doing, I'm a lot less likely to go out and just stop and buy something on the way home or order in takeout because I have a plan and I have my ingredients and I don't want them to go to waste. And so the idea is that you take a look at your schedule for the week and start planning your meals around whatever else is going on in your life. So for example, sometimes I'm teaching a class in the evening and that's going to influence what kind of meals I might prepare for dinner that week. So first I take a look at dinner menus because they're kind of the big ones I plan around. And plan on which days do I have time to cook, which days do I want to be able to use leftovers, when is a good time to use that Instapot or that crock pot because you're not going to be home until right before dinner. So these are the kinds of things that can really be helpful as you're planning it out day by day. You want to also take time to check foods that you have on hand. What do you have that needs to be used up? Or take a look at those cans that are in the back of the cupboard that, we want to make sure we're not having food waste and using things. What do you have in the freezer that might be good to pull out and use this week? Plan to use them in your meals. You can also, as we mentioned earlier, check grocery ads for menu ideas. Sometimes when I see somebody's having a sale on something, I'm like, oh, that would be perfect in this favorite recipe, and I'm going to plan that this week. Once you kind of have your ideas down for the dinner, then you can start thinking about lunch ideas. Are you going to use dinner leftovers? That's my favorite lunch, is dinner leftovers. And that encourages me to make a little more. So we have lunch leftovers. But other people like to do different things. And then add in your foods for healthy breakfasts and snacks to your grocery list as well. That's where I want to make sure that we've got good things that people can pick up easily in my household that are healthy. And so, essentially planning that meals out for a week, creating your shopping list, keeping it simple and flexible. Sometimes you think that on Wednesday night you're going to feel like cooking, but maybe not so much, and then you can switch it around and use up leftovers and cook the next night. We do want to think about both cost and nutrition and convenience and time, all those important variables. Um, and people are mentioning, and we're going to talk about this a little more coming forward, about using apps to help with list and meal planning. So that's a really good strategy too. All right, next slide. I just want to remind people to put those vegetables into your meal plan. That may be something we have to stop and think about. And when we're thinking about using vegetables, we can think about, when is it better to use fresh vegetables and when is it better to use vegetables that are frozen or perhaps canned? And so overall, across all the seasons, frozen fruits and vegetables tend to be less expensive than fresh and to be very nutritious. So keep that in mind as you're planning things. But when you can buy in season, if it's something that's available, especially at your local farmer's market, that's when you're going to get your best prices of fresh produce. And we want to keep in mind how far the food has to travel. So maybe it's in season halfway around the world, but not in season here. And you're going to see that the cost of transportation is built into the price of the produce. So when you have to buy something that's being produced and is fresh halfway around the world, you have to pay more for it to be transported over here. I know that for many of us, the salad bars or the pre-cut produce really does make it more convenient to use, and so we're more likely to use it. And that's something that we want to think about when we're planning what we want to buy. And one of the things I just thought was really fun, and I'm kind of geeky about different calculators and things though, is there's an interactive chart at USDA that lets you look at the cost of vegetables depending on whether they're fresh or frozen or, I believe, canned, and it's just really fun to look at it. And you can look at it depending on kind of the time of year and things. So for example, when I happened to look at it at that moment in time, a cup of corn fresh was costing $1.81, and canned was costing 51 cents, and frozen was costing 61 cents. So that doesn't mean that I'm not going to eat my corn fresh if that's the way I like it, but it does give me some ideas when I'm looking to save money. And then of course, it does depend on the season. There are times when fresh corn is much less expensive. Okay, moving on. We want to help you create a food budget if that's something that you would like to do, or you would like to think about limiting how much you're spending on food or reducing it so you have money to put towards other things in your life. And one of the strategies that we really recommend that you stop and consider doing is tracking how much you're spending. Where are you spending the money? Are you spending it at the grocery stores? Are you spending it eating prepared food? Are you spending it at coffee shops? And that will give you good data to make some decisions about, are you comfortable with where your dollars are going, or would you like to shift it around? Typically, we do find from the research that, eating food that we prepare at home often is less expensive than food eaten out. Not all the time, but it's just sort of something to keep in mind as we go forward. And I think this will be kind of an interesting time period because, as Sasha said, our food purchase habits have most likely been changed some in the last couple of months. And so she says she's been spending much more at grocery stores during this time of staying in place. And I'm curious to see, as we move forward, how much of our behavior changes stay in place and how much we go back to old habits. And this is a great time to do that assessment. What works for you and what are you willing to change to save money? So tracking your expenses, deciding how much you want to spend, and then going back to look at the data over each month to see how you're doing and is it working for you, or do you need to make modifications in your goals and what you want to do? All right. I also want to remember that sometimes we just don't have enough money to go around to pay all our bills, and there is food assistance out there for people who are finding that they don't have enough money. And these are important resources. So one program is SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and this helps low-income people and families buy the food they need for good health. And we are putting the resources to how to apply for that in the chat. Many communities who have food banks and pantries available to help people with groceries. You can call, if you live in Illinois, you can dial 211 anywhere from Illinois and ask. The person that answers the phone will be someone relatively local, and they will you can ask them, where are the food banks and pantries in my community that I could go to, and they'll be able to give you that list. So that's very helpful. There's also often coupons, or at our farmers markets, there's often programs that help people who are either on SNAP, or some farmer markets participate in a senior farmers market coupons where you can get additional dollars to spend at the farmers market. So for example, if you spend $10 of your SNAP dollars, they'll kick in another $10, so match it. And then you really have $20 to spend at the farmers market. So be sure to ask about that when you dial 211 or when you go to your farmers market to see if these programs are there. And we've got good information going into the chat. There's also WIC and fresh access bucks in some communities. And Illinois, there's always websites that can help with pantries like northernillinoisfoodbank.com. 211's a really easy thing for me to remember, so that's why I like to use that one. But other places are just as good and can be helpful too. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to Seisha, and she's going to talk some more about cost savings.
So I just also want to mention that in our counties, a lot of us have some SNAP Ed or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, either educators or community workers. So those people usually have their thumb on the local things that are going on. So if you are looking to connect with somebody locally, please just let us know. We're going to move forward. Just a reminder, make sure that everyone's mics are muted. But we're going to talk about some cost-saving apps. So apps can do a lot of different things to help us save money on food. For example, they can help us with coupons or even rebates, and they can also help us with shopping lists. That's probably one of my favorite things. They can even scan barcodes of like a can and show what we have in our pantries, and then make a list for next time we go to the store. So if you realize that you don't have any more cans of tomatoes, that you can put that on your list. You also should look for apps for maybe grocery stores that you go to often. I know that I have a few downloaded on my phone, and they help me see the ads for that week and also specials for the next week. It's probably one of my favorite things to look at during, when I have some free time, some downtime, just to kind of prep for the week. I also kind of want to talk about, in this section, just talking about grocery shopping online. I know that's a new thing for some people. I've been doing grocery shopping online for a long time now. So we actually have a blog post that I think Brooke has probably put in the chat by now, but it gives you kind of the ins and outs of how to grocery shop online, and kind of like how much you might need to spend, or where can you get the groceries from, and then of course like making any kind of adjustments. So for like example, yesterday I needed an order to have groceries delivered to my house, and I really needed some rice, and the rice I picked wasn't in stock. And so I was actually messaging the the person who was shopping for me back and forth about, you know, what could be a good substitute instead of this certain rice that I wanted. And then they found the rice on the end cap, you know, like on the end cap of an aisle, and I was like, yay! So we had like a nice little like camaraderie of like, thank you, shopper, for finding my awesome rice that I needed, but also, you know, having that discussion back and forth of like, hey, I need a substitution. It really does help. So if you have more questions about grocery shopping online, throw them in the chat. And if I can't get to them right now, we'll get to them later for sure. And of course, we'd love to hear about like what your favorite apps are. So please feel free to put them in the chat as well. We love learning about new apps, especially if we haven't heard about them before. So just a thing to add. So another thing is always, I like to try new recipes. You know, whether it's soups and salads or, you know, the main course. One of the things I did this weekend is I am trying to eat healthier. You know, I think a lot of us are trying to do that. And I actually made potato salad, but instead of potatoes, I used cauliflower, which I know is crazy, one of those crazy things. But it was really it was nice to try new recipes. So if you have a certain maybe vegetable that you've never had before, or if you don't really know what to, like it's sitting in the fridge and you don't really know what to do with it, just Google a recipe and see what comes up, and maybe you'll find something new. That's kind of been my latest try, again, with the cauliflower, just trying to do new and different things with it. Like a couple weeks ago, we had Mexican food, and I put some like, you know, taco seasoning on it with like some cumin and some other things, and I put it in the oven to bake for like 30 minutes, and it was so delicious. So always try new recipes. That's my here for you. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about also is the USDA MyPlate. You might be pretty familiar with maybe the food pyramid, but quite a few years ago, actually now, we decided to switch over to the MyPlate. And it has a really great website about online tools, things to help you with meal planning, and then of course, any kind of email updates. So we have really enjoyed looking at the USDA MyPlate, giving it all the things, but it also gives some good things about budgeting for food costs. And so if this is something you're interested in, please definitely check this website out. So, and then coming up, of course, hold on one second. We also have a really great website from the University of Illinois Extension. It's called Eat.Move.Save. And so you can check out this website for its recipes. And then that website is in the chat. So Eat.Save.Move has tons of different recipes. So you can have things like main dishes, or your soups, or your sandwiches, snacks, dessert, anything like that. Please just check it out, and it helps you with some other things about like reading the food label, food safety, and other eating tips. And then lastly, as we're kind of starting to wrap up the webinar, hopefully you've enjoyed it. But we definitely want to, you know, make sure that you determine what's important to you. So we talked a little bit about those healthy, fresh meals that we talked about earlier. You know, depends on your nutritional taste and values. Of course, we want to talk about tracking your spending. That's really important. You know, especially if you're looking for a place to save on, tracking whether it's eating out or at the grocery store can help kind of curb those expenses, especially if you're, again, looking to save costs. And then you can always make plans to changing spending. So now that you've been through this webinar, you've found maybe some resources that you'd like to try, or other great recipes that you'd like to try. We have talked about some apps in the comments. It's a great way to kind of put that all together and make sure that you can make some plans to change that spending. I also just want to point out just quickly, you know, this is shameless self-promotion of some personal finance programs that we have going on. So we have a blog. It's called Plan Well, Retire Well, and you can find that there. Or if you're really interested in podcasts, we have a podcast called Family Financial Feuds, and you can find that on most listening devices. So whether you're an Apple or Android user, or whether you'd like to listen to it on our platform, which is SoundCloud, all great places. And then next up, I just want to talk about, we are doing a webinar series. It actually started last week, but you can still jump in. This next week, we're going to be talking about borrowing, and it's every Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time all this summer except for the week of 4th of July. So if this is something you're interested in, you can check that out. The link should be in the chat from Brooke, and you can just quickly sign up if you've enjoyed today and would like to learn more. So I think that's all that we have. We'd love for you to stay in contact with us. We are, if you'd like to check us out on Facebook or Twitter or any of the other kind of popular social medias, you can probably find us. But if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll answer them as we go along. But we've really enjoyed having you on today, and thank you for being on Zoom.
Thank you so much for coming on. And if you have could go online to the survey I'm putting in chat right now, it's an online survey, should take less than 5 minutes to do. And we just really would appreciate your feedback so that we can continue to improve our programming. So, again, thank you for coming on, and I hope everybody walked away with one idea and a little excitement about preparing cost-saving healthy food.